we wrote.
We are in it. So yeah.
You know, The White Shadow was, well, first of all, it was a terrific show.
Yeah.
Second of all, I'm a huge sports fan. We had a basketball court there. I love basketball. I became good friends with John Falsey on that. As I said, we were the two guys who wrote. We were the only writers on the show. None of the other producers wrote. And I became friends with Thomas Carter, and who has remained one of my closest friends and on that show. And you know, I mean, I don't, you know, by the time I wrote, as I said, it ran 3 seasons. I wrote 6 episodes in the 2nd season, and I was a story editor on the 3rd. And you know, in a lot of the most interesting stuff on that show happened in the 1st season. Some of the darker stuff that you were talking about, or you had mentioned, you know, I mean, it was a great experience in a lot of ways. I mean, it was one of the, you know, and interesting. Thomas was a friend of mine. I remember years later, maybe 20, 30 years later, we were downtown LA, and we walked into a chicken place to get some chicken or something, or some fast food place, I don't know. And the people all recognized and remembered him from being, you know, Carter, and it was very influential for people. And I guess it was, you know, first time that they got to see, other than a sitcom or something, black people got to see, African Americans got to see these guys. Now again, I had the white basketball coach, but he really was a basketball player too. You know, what's his name? I forgot his name. Ken Reeves, you know, was that wasn't his name as the actor's name, but he's a lovely guy too. And you know, and sort of, so what I got out of the show really was becoming Thomas's friend, and becoming friends with John, and also learning one of the things that has stood me in good stead, and they still kid me on about on the Americans. You know, one of the things that you have to be, or you used to have to be on a network show where they did 22 episodes in a season, you have to write quickly. You have to be able to, or a director, you have to be able to make decisions. You shoot 8 pages a day. You know, in a movie you shoot 2 pages a day. So I have friends who are wonderful writers who aren't happy working in television because you just have to turn it over fast. Right. And it was something I could do, and a way I liked to work. So I learned that working on The White Shadow, because Falsey and I had to write all the scripts, and you know, there was some, you know, one of the shows which is not a very good show, and it was like, I wrote it. It was an episode, and it was like, it had the corniest title, If Your Number's Up, Get Down, or something. It was about high blood pressure in the black community, and we got all of these sort of famous athletes to be on the show. Magic Johnson was in it, but one of them was Bill Russell, and I've always been not only a fan of Bill Russell's, I don't know if you know who he is. He was the center for the Boston Celtics, who, you know, one of the greatest players ever, but he was also a guy with real dignity and presence and a kind of power about him. And one of the things that, again, he wasn't a friend of mine, but he at all, and you know, apparently people said he wasn't that friendly. He wouldn't sign autographs for a long period of his career and stuff like that. Anyway, he agreed to be on the show. And I remember he was sitting in my office and we were talking. And I, of course, was really, I mean, you know, like a lot of people in Hollywood, we're all starstruck by athletes, you know. Not really movie stars, but athletes. You know, and particularly if you're a guy and you love sports. I mean, we had Mickey Mantle on the show, you know. I mean, that was like a huge deal for me. I grew up in New York. I was a baseball fan. But anyway, Bill Russell, and what I remember is, I don't know how I got into it. I was talking to him. I wanted to talk to him. And he was like not the friendliest, chattiest guy in the world, but he was being nice. And I said, so how does being as successful as you come, how has it changed you? And he looked at me and he said, it doesn't. He said, it just allows you to become who you really are. And I remember that. I was like 20-something. And that really stuck with me, because it's true. You know, you think, oh, people changed. Oh, look at you, you changed. And people always say that because maybe, you know, you're no longer interested in being their friend. You know, it's kind of like junior high school or something. But it's true. I mean, if you're a good guy to begin with, you become a better guy. And if you're a shithead, then you become a bigger shithead. And I found that to be true as I've sort of, move through the ranks and stuff. And so I got that out of the White Shadow too. And I had fun writing the episodes, but I just wanted to not get fired and survive. This was my chance to sort of, I'd gotten in.
I mean, critically though, I mean, you were nominated for Humanitas Award. I mean,
Yeah, but I didn't know what that meant really.
You didn't at the time?
Nah, I mean, I didn't. It was kind of like I didn't. I mean, maybe I knew what it was, but it didn't. I was just. I was back on the Love Boat.
Yeah.
That's what I cared about, and I was doing something that I was writing something that I knew something about and that I loved, basketball.
Right.
And I had, met two really good friends, that were gonna, regardless of what was gonna happen, they were gonna sort of stay with me through my life. And Thomas has, John has sort of drifted off, and so that was really what I got out of working on the show. It was somebody threw me a life raft, and it was really John Falsey who threw me the life raft, and I suppose again he didn't have to leave the White Shadow, but he wanted to. I'm sorry, not the White Shadow, St. Elsewhere. Skipping ahead, and that's sort of when we were partners. I mean, that's when, because people wanted to hire us together, and
Right.
and at that point then I was in my 30s. I was married. I had a kid. And he was my good friend, and so we then became partners, and we did the shows that came after that until the partnership ended. So that's that. I don't know what else to tell you about the.
Well, let's go back to what we were talking about off camera about what you were talking about that you're doing this medical show and they want to know that you know what you're talking about. So you were actually, those 3 days you spent in the Cleveland Clinic, you were soaking in all of these terms.
Well, it was, yeah, it was all because of Lance, because,
Yeah.
and by the way, I did the same thing in the police department. Well, I'm jumping ahead. When Lance he was a doctor. He's the only doctor ever become a uniformed policeman in New York City.
Do a story about him.
Yeah, well, I did. We did a pilot about it. The problem with that is nobody believed it, because the real story about my friend Lance is he. Should I just jump ahead?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So Lance basically said somebody should do something about a teaching hospital. I sell it to Grant Tinker. I'm going to do it by myself. All of a sudden it becomes, the whole White Shadow team is being resurrected, and I'm one of many. I'm not happy about that, particularly since it doesn't get picked up. It's just writing a pilot. We had to write 10 scripts before the show gets picked up, because the network, Jeff Zagansky, the guy who basically, is, oh no, he's at CBS then, I'm sorry. That has to do with Northern Exposure. But anyway, so things are sort of repeating themselves and coming together, and decisions that have been made, and and I have to we write 10 of them because this is a new form in television. It's a lot of money. The networks are concerned, that people aren't going to follow multiple stories without a single lead, that you're mixing comedy and drama. And of course, in a medical show, and I said we saw Hospital, which is Patty Chayefsky. It's very dark. I don't even know if people would see it as a comedy anymore. Losing patients in a hospital, and so we did this. We're doing the show, and Lance comes out to be the advisor. But prior to that, Lance calls me up and he says, "Josh, you sitting down?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "When Lance got out of college, remember when I said when I went back to New York, there was a hiring freeze in New York." Mm-hmm. Well, at that same time, or a couple of years prior, Lance gets out of college and he takes the test for the New York City Police Department. His father had been a cop, but they're not hiring any cops anymore because of the city's gone bankrupt. The city was going to do what Donald Trump wants to do, which is to sell off all the assets to, Central Park, make it Amazon Park. Let them buy it, let them own it, let them charge you money to go into it. Easy. Infrastructure. You don't have to basically pay for it. You want to fix a bridge? Call it the Microsoft Bridge. Let them charge money to cross over the Kosciuszko Bridge, and it wouldn't cost people a dime. So so they're not hiring. They don't have money for firemen and for policemen. So Lance becomes a doctor at the Cleveland Clinic. He's a resident. He calls me. He said, "You sitting down?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, I just got a letter from the New York City Police Department. They're hiring me again. And back in the day when I took the test, I was near the top of the list. So they want to let me be a police department." He's 30 years old. Now we're 31 years old. I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he goes, "I'm going to go to New York and be a cop." And I said, "Are you a doctor? I mean, you're not like leaving?" He goes, "No, I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor. I'm a resident. I'm a doctor." So he goes to New York and becomes a cop. And as I said, cops are just like doctors. They don't really, sort of talk to people outside the fraternity because there's a lot of stuff that goes on inside the fraternity. But anyway, so you had asked me, that's a great story. So we did Lance's story and we made the pilot. But nobody believed it because while he was a cop in the New York City Police Department known as Doc, and I rode around in cars with him. They go, "Hey, Doc." And the people in the precinct would say, "Hey, Doc, would you take a look at this? Would you take a look at that?" I got a little burning sensation, that. And while he's doing that, he's also moonlighting at night in an emergency room because he liked medicine too. He said medicine was maternal and being a cop was paternal, and he liked both sides of it. And he met his wife, who was a nurse, when he was moonlighting at night in the emergency room. So we wrote this thing about a guy, it's his story, who was a cop during the day and a doctor at night. Yeah, and everybody makes the same joke, shoot you and then patch you up. But nobody believed it. It was like a bad programmer's dream, but it was true. So we did do that, and that never happened. But that was my friend Lance. So Bruce had offered to make him the medical guy on the show, who you have to have a medical guy on a hospital show or medical show. But he said, "No, I'm going to New York to do this thing." So he didn't, and we did a year of St. Elsewhere, and that was a great experience, and on so many ways. And it was, but the episodes we did then were dark. I mean, it wasn't people go into hospitals, and it was often the Paddy Chayefsky thing. Bad stuff happens in hospitals.
And there's a lot of things that changed, right? The director. Paltrow came shot the pilot, and then everything
Paltrow didn't
changed.
shot the pilot. We had a guy. His name was Lou. I can't remember his last name. And a number of people got David. The Howie Mandel part was originally played by David Paymer, and he got replaced.
Right.
And years later, David, who's a wonderful actor, came up to me and said, "I want to thank you." And I said, "Really, thank me?" I said, "For what?" He goes, "For giving me a movie career." And Joseph Summer originally had the part that Ed Flanders had. He got replaced. And the director, Lou D'Antonio, was replaced. And it was a question of who was going to direct it. And Thomas, who had directed a couple of episodes of The White Shadow, and I think it might have I don't know if he had done another pilot by then. Maybe he had. I don't know when Miami Vice came out. But so I sort of lobbied for Thomas, and John was a friend of Thomas's as well. And Thomas came in and directed the pilot. And that sort of was a great thing for his career, but it was a great thing for the show and a great thing for all of us. And but then at the end of that year, I knew that I was going to be going, and then the show kind of changed. And John Macias, who hadn't been a writer on The White Shadow, became a writer and worked with Tom Fontana and those guys. And we brought Tom in from. I had met Tom when we were writing the pilot up in Williamstown, and I in my mind, I gave Tom his first job, and I've read what Tom says that Bruce gave him his first job, but I know that I went into Bruce in my world and said, "I'd like to give Tom a job," and Bruce was very happy. He'd known Tom, but Tom's name never came up in The White Shadow or anything. And so Tom was there, and he was writing, and then I left, and John didn't have to leave, but he wanted to leave. And so then we sort of were on our own, and we thought we were going to get a pilot commitment from NBC. We didn't get one, but we then had a deal at Universal. And we didn't really know what we were going to do. I don't remember what happened, but I remember one day I was reading in the trades that there was a little thing that said Steven Spielberg has an episode of a show of 44 episodes has gotten picked up. And I called my agent, or I called one of the executives at Universal. We were sitting around playing darts or going to the batting cage trying to figure out what we could do. And he said, "Are you interested in this?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I just read it. It's a Universal thing, and you guys, I have a contract here." And And then the next thing I know, he says, well, Stephen would like to meet you. So we go over to meet into his place on the Universal lot, and he was a lovely guy to us. And I remember he said, so are you guys fans of the Twilight Zones? And I said, I like it, but I'm not a fan. No, I watched the Twilight Zone. And he said, you like science fiction? I said, not particularly, I mean, and we just had a nice conversation, and I thought, well, okay, that's sort of the end of that. And I get back, and I get a call, and it says, Sidney Sheinberg, who is the head of Universal, wants to meet with you tomorrow. And so go in to meet with Sidney Sheinberg, and Kathy Kennedy is there, and somebody else is there. And Sidney Sheinberg was the guy who took over Universal from Lou Wasserman. And I remember sitting there, and I don't even know what the show is. It's kind of like... And he goes, so, I got this great idea for an episode of Amazing Stories. I'm doing what you're doing. I'm thinking, this is the guy who runs the whole studio. He's wanted to meet with us. What's he... And he proceeds to tell us a story about, I don't know, something like a dog that can talk. And I go, oh. And I walk out of there, and it's like a weird meeting. I don't know. I mean, and Kathy Kennedy says, so, we've had researchers who've been doing a lot of research about different kinds of stories and stuff like that. And I go, well, so I guess they wanted us to do this job, And I said, well, it's 44 stories. I'm sure, like, Spielberg has lots of stories, and he's got lots of stuff, and we can come up with ideas. And he goes, no, Amazing Stories, she says, is a very successful comic book, and it has loads of fans, and we have to stay true to the vision of Amazing Stories. I go, I'll be honest with you, I've never heard of it,
Yeah.
And we go back, and they have these researchers, and literally it was like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and they go in, and there's this room with these guys who've been for like a year and a half, and they literally have floor to... They'd started with Amazing Stories, and they'd gone through every story in the history of stories since the Gilgamesh flood or something. And I basically said, Kathy, if I read these stories, I will be reading them for the next 5 years. Well, what do you want me to do? Well, turn off the tap. I mean, to start with, I mean, this is like crazy. Anyway, so, we worked on Amazing Stories, and it was an extraordinary experience that sort of went beyond, making a television show, because I got to work with Martin Scorsese and Clint Eastwood and the best, composers, and Sam Waterston did one.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was like an incredible experience, and it was an anthology, and John would produce one episode and I produced the other, and, so we were like, but again, it goes back to what a producer is. I mean, I remember one time talking with Stephen, and again, I he wasn't a friend of mine, but I liked him, and I think he liked me too. Of course, people went crazy when they were around him. I mean, it was just sort of like, your life is going to change, like you said, we were talking about, and all of a sudden, and he's going to like my idea, and then I'm going to be the biggest screenwriter in Hollywood or the biggest director. And so everybody he didn't have to do anything when it came to that, and everybody went nuts. And, so, I forgot what I was going to say, but, so we would, I'm trying to think if there was a particular conversation, but we got to work with all these incredible people, and he had a lot of his own ideas, and some of them were very small. There would be like 2 people become magnetized, and my job was to turn that into a story. Or he would have an 8-page story about something. He would, and he was very, very involved in all aspects of the show. This is before we had really the internet.
Yeah.
So he would be shooting, I don't know, The Color Purple or something. We'd be sending him tapes, those big tapes, blockbuster type tapes, and so he could see actors and stuff like that. And I always had, and he knew more about television than anybody I'd ever met. I mean, he knew, and he would know shows that were on the same time, at the same night. And I would go, and in my head I would, because again, we didn't have
VCR yet.
Yeah, and I would picture that he would come home. This is my head.
Yeah.
This is not. And they'd flip on the light, and there would be like 12 televisions, all with something different playing. And he loved television, and he didn't have a an attitude about it. And he also, and it was interesting because I had, when he had sort of met with me and John, and then we had the job. Now, I don't know what kind of due diligence he did or didn't do. I know he had people I'm sure would, I don't know. But he was a guy who really trusted himself intuitively and instinctively. And I noticed it when we started working on it, and I had some friends who were actors, and I recommended them for a part. And they weren't famous. They were working actors. And Steven said, have him come in. And he would sit and talk to him for like 10 minutes, and the guy would leave and he'd go, okay, he's good. And it was this, it wasn't, there was no arrogance. It was just a confidence that he trusted, that he knew, he understood, he got something that he needed to get. And he did that with me, and he did that with actors. Obviously, if he's working with a famous actor, you know, he didn't have to do it. But I remember one time, the first one he directed had, what's his name, Kevin, Dances with Wolves. Costner. And he was in the episode. And I remember he was watching and he said, he could have been Indiana Jones. And it was like, nobody knew, you know, he just would look at it and he would say, he could have been Indiana Jones. You know, it was like Harrison Ford obviously was Indiana Jones. But it was like, he just knew it. It was like for him, it was like riding a bicycle, the whole thing. And I remember one time, and I was a producer, theoretically, but I was, except and he was directing something, and I remember talking to him, and I said, well, you know, well, if you do it this way, it'll cost so and so. If you do it this way, it costs so and so. And you could save $50,000 if you do it this way. And he was really very nice. He just looked at me, and I realized, and it was like, ding. It was like, he didn't say anything. It was just like, what am I, me? Am I fucking crazy? The guy's made $1 billion in the studio. He doesn't give a shit if it saves $50,000 or not. He was not a spendthrift. It wasn't like he was trying to spend the money. He just wanted what he wanted. And I realized, well, quite honestly, if I had a grandmother, they were killed in the Holocaust, she could have produced for him. Just give him what he wants is essentially what the job is, you know. And he's not going to say, I want a gold-plated bathroom. He's just going to say, this is what I want to do the thing I want to do.
Yeah, don't worry me with the money.
I'm not interested in what the thing is. And I'm not, but again, he was given how successful he was, at least to me, he was a very grounded person, you know. Mm-hmm. And he you know, but he had all these protective things around him, and people wanted to be part of the I had no interest in doing that. I had my own family, and that's just who I am.
Why did you want to do it? I mean, to work with him, or what attracted you to
Well, first of all, it was an anthology,
yeah.
And so I got to work with Clint Eastwood and Martin Scorsese and people who weren't that famous, but Paul Barth, who did Eating Raoul at the time was a big movie. I mean, it was like, and also I had a deal at Universal, and I remember Universal wanted us to do. They were paying us money, me and Falsey, and they wanted us to do this show called Island Sons. And Falsey was nervous, and he said, yeah, I think we should do it. And I said, we can't do it. We can't do this show. Oh, I had a kid. It was like, if we basically go from doing St. Elsewhere to doing Island Sons, we're never climbing back up onto the high horse. But it was a scary time because we didn't have anything. So when this thing happened, it was Spielberg, It wasn't like it was just some guy who was doing some genre piece. It was like, who knows what this is going to be? And we got to, most of the episodes were his own, but he let us do a bunch of them. And I don't know, we worked with Sid Caesar. I mean, it was like, it was an experience that went beyond just working on a television show. And we would be I remember he would have his friends, Robert Zemeckis and Jay Cox, and people would come in there. And so you were working with like really incredibly talented people and just being around them. And I was still a pisher. It was just kind of like, I felt like, this is like really cool. And big directors would come in and, we'd have lunch with them, and David Cronenberg, and it'd be like, wow, this is like really cool. And so it was an extraordinary experience. But once again, I was invited to leave at the end of the first year.
What does that mean exactly?
It's fired. You're fired. I think that's a phrase that I don't know who I first heard use it, but
I like that better, of course.
The show did not do well. They're not going to fire Steven Spielberg, so it was kind of you know, but that was okay. Then it was sort of, well, but while we were doing that, it was interesting. Brandon Tartikoff, who was the head of NBC, had an idea for an episode. Well, these guys had episodes they wanted to do. And Spielberg said, you guys know Brandon? And I said, well, he said, work with him on his episode. So we would meet with Brandon to do Brandon's episode and write his episode, the episode he wanted to do. Pissed Brandon off because Spielberg never made his episode. He said, he's making all these shitty episodes. He's not making my episode. Why would he make my episode? We didn't know. Anyway, but we got to sort of be friendly with him, and he was a nice guy.
Didn't he? I heard that he was responsible for saving St. Elsewhere, that it was actually canceled. Were you still there when that happened?
I wasn't there. The show was very dark, and they called us, the guys on the show, not Dr. Death and Mr. Depression, because there was a lot of humor, but it was dark humor, and a lot of people didn't walk out of that hospital when we were doing it, and I was happy about that because I was basically, again, it's not knowing. It's not knowing. There's an advantage to not knowing enough, and there's a disadvantage. The advantage was I didn't know how lucky I was. I felt something had been taken away from me.
Right, it was your baby.
It was my baby, but I didn't know. Wait a second. This is a collaborative medium. Nobody does anything alone. Forget about an auteur theory. There's all different kinds of people. You have to work with other people. And what you don't know, Josh Brand, is in success, there's enough to go around for everybody. Mm. Now, when you're young and you don't know that, you think, hey, you're taking this away from me. This was mine. And so, in retrospect, I didn't play well with others.
Were you just trying to assert your own?
No, I was
imprint?
mad. I was mad. I'm like, why do I have to? This was mine. I basically had this. I sold this to the so and so. And really, what nobody said to me, which wouldn't even have made sense to me then, which is that a show isn't a career. It's another step in a journey. And you will get a lot out of it. And you will get things that will allow other things to happen going forward. And it takes a certain maturity and a certain perspective to understand that. I didn't have that. I didn't go to film school. I didn't know how things worked. I didn't know, if, what the difference was between a supervising producer and a coordinating producer was. I didn't really pay attention to that. I just knew what I knew as a human being. And so the lack of experience and knowledge and understanding was a good thing. It allowed me to take risks, but it was a bad thing because I basically didn't know. It created expectations which weren't real expectations, real obtainable goals given what the scenario was and where I was in the trajectory of the journey, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
what were you able to imprint, would you say, on that show? I mean, did you have
on St. Elsewhere?
Yeah.
The characters, the tone, it was prior, other than Hill Street, which again had not come out when we started doing it. Multiple stories. I mean, listen, a lot of the stuff that goes on today in healthcare, unfortunately, is still around. And we did an episode, I remember, that it was somebody comes into the hospital and has symptoms of something, and they run them through tests. Now, the tests, the bill adds up on a typewriter. But I don't know if you've ever looked at a bill if you've gone to a doctor. It is basically, today, unintelligible. $6,400, but the deduction from the insurance is $5,200, plus the thing you get in addition to the deduction, the benefit because you're so-and-so is another $800, you owe $700, you owe $76. I mean, it's insane. And nobody knows. And then you go, well, how do you break that down? Well, the Band-Aid that they basically gave you was $47.50. And, the system is just...
And it was so much cheaper then, but I remember there's one scene where the husband and wife go to pay the bill, and they're
That's
like,
right.
"What? That was all of our money." What?
That's right. And we couldn't. There's nothing wrong with you. That's basically the upshot of it.
But be thankful there's nothing wrong with you, so pay up.
That's right. So there were things that were going on in medicine and in hospitals, and they're teaching hospitals in New York. I have a friend who went to teaching hospital in New York, and for a year and a half they told him he had acid reflux, and then they said, whoops, we made a mistake. You have metastatic melanoma. I was like, how did I miss that? Well, you know what? These things happen. And you know what? And by friends who are doctors who say, listen, it's a insane, messed up system. Everyone feeds at the trough. The doctors, the insurance companies, the patients, and nobody wants to give up anything. And so now we're still dealing with the same stuff that was being dealt with in St. Elsewhere. And we dealt with those kinds of things. And it was not a melodrama. It was a melodrama, but in the sense that good things are melodramas. I mean, it wasn't The Godfather, which is the greatest melodrama of all time, maybe, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm being raped in the hallway kind of a thing. And it was, and yet it was, and so it was what I wanted it to be. And of course, my litmus test was Lance. And Lance said, hey, you know what? This isn't embarrassing to me. The doctors like this. This feels...
You were getting that feedback.
It feels like it has a certain degree of verisimilitude, that this is what's, there was a thing early on, the thing of playing music in a operating room. Go into an operating room, there would be Bruce Springsteen, headbutting one surgeon, headbutting another surgeon across the operating table. It was real. It was funny. It was crazy. But it was real.
So is what they're doing.
It's what they're doing. I mean, it was, and talking to doctors about that. And I remember, David Morse had a monologue in the pilot about how he gets woken from his dream about, that was Lance. It was just Lance. They had created a system where all these young doctors would work 48 hours straight without sleeping. What job can you do well if you haven't slept in 48 hours? I hear in my business, they go, hey man, page 1 rewrite, how to work on the last 36 hours, and you want to go, well, no wonder the script is a piece of shit. I mean, who can do anything good when they're working 40? Why do they work 40 hours? It's just enough to pay them. That was the system. And Paddy Chayefsky nailed it in hospital. And that's still what it is. Go into an emergency room. My wife had to go into an emergency room. She fell when she was running. I mean, it's insane. It's just insane. I mean, she fell, broke her wrist in Ireland. We had to go into an emergency room. It's the most civilized thing in the world. It's like $100. $100. Well, don't you want to know what they have to do? No, it's $100 for whatever they do. Put the cast on. You want an operation? It's $100. It's like, what? So that's the imprint, and people loved the show, and we had, a lot of the characters remained, and then they introduced new characters, and the show ran, for years and years and years, and I'm sure it changed. And
did you watch it after?
I don't, but I don't really watch any show that I've left. I don't really watch, and it's not because I just find it hard to watch. I mean, otherwise it's. And one of the things another thing I've learned is. It's one of the reasons why I've enjoyed working on The Americans, where it's not my show. I'm a consulting producer, and of course, when I started on it, I mean, I'm sure you'll get to that on some level, but they said, well, so, okay, Josh, you can be an executive producer. I don't want to be an executive producer. Well, co-executive, no, I don't want to be a co-executive producer. I'd like to be a creative consultant. Well, they don't give that title out anymore. I say, okay, consulting producer. They said, yes, but if the show wins an Emmy, you don't get an Emmy. And I said, okay, I'll still take consulting producer. These guys are lovely. If the show wins an Emmy, they made sure I would get an Emmy. You can, but the point was that, and it goes back to even St. Elsewhere, why I behaved badly. It isn't about, when you feel something is yours, it isn't that you love it more. It isn't like you love a biological child more than an adopted child. It's ego identification. It's when it's, so for example, if you have a pet and you're going out of town, you ask me to take care of your dog, and you say, I don't feed my dog treats. I won't feed your dog treats because it's your dog. If it's my dog, I'm going to give him treats whenever I want to give him treats, So when you separate yourself from it and say, it's not mine, I don't have that proprietary interest in it, it's yours, it's freeing. It doesn't mean that you care less. It doesn't mean that you try less hard. It just means that you don't feel something's being taken away from you, which is what I felt in St. Elsewhere. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry, guys, I apologize for acting badly. I do. It was not your fault, and I didn't know, and I felt that somebody had taken my dessert or something.
Yeah.
So, but I loved doing it, and I loved doing the stories, and there were, funny things of, I participated in casting, but Bruce would be, when actors were replaced, he was talking to the network, we didn't. But we got to do the stories that we wanted to do. And even though some of them were real dark, he didn't basically say, you can't do these stories because they're too dark. But when we were gone, people said they lightened up the show, and it's one of the reasons they brought the show back, that they told the network that they were not going to make it as depressing or whatever it was, but I got to make the show that I wanted to make, and that was always the thing that was most important to me. And again, it goes back to, I didn't know how difficult or not difficult it would be to ever do this again. I didn't know if, just do another show, or if it would never happen again, which is frequently the case. So And I think if I would have known more, I would have been more frightened. I don't think it would have been more liberating. I think I would have been more afraid to. I would have done Island Sons. I would have,
Right.
I would have done it, but I didn't know enough. I didn't know enough to, to say that. So fortunately, I think that I got really, and it is luck, whatever luck is. But so when we got to work with Brandon, and after we got fired from the Spielberg show, Brandon called us up and said, "Listen, I think we had a pilot script we developed about a family show or something, but he said, look, I'd like to do this. I'd like to do a show on this family, but I can only air it at Christmas time."
This is A Year in the Life.
Yeah. He said, "I can only do it at Christmas time. Can you guys deliver it at Christmas time?" And we said at this point, yes is a better word than no. Sure. And we had to do 6 hours. We didn't have the scripts. I can't remember how much time we had. We had to start shooting, I don't know, in October. It's like August. We don't have any scripts. And what we know is, I don't remember why, but we were going to shoot 3 weeks in Seattle, Washington. And after finishing those 3 weeks of scenes in all 6 episodes, we were then going to come back to LA while they were building our sets and finish everything that needed to be filled in from the stuff that we hadn't shot in Seattle. Well, that meant you had to know what was going to happen in all 6 hours.
I was going to say, that's quite a logistical feat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had to, and we didn't have any scripts. So we just started working, and I remember we would be up in Seattle, and we would just be saying, here's the scene, and this will go, and we figured out, what the progression would be for the 6 hours, because, and I always wondered, I don't know if Brandon, I don't know why he sort of gave us that. I don't know if he liked the idea and he liked the story. He was pissed off that Spielberg never made his episode. He kind of liked us because he liked us when he was working with us. I don't really know why, but he did, and he made it, and he put it on. And it was what it also taught me, which was helpful, is you can do anything. You can do anything. Never say no until you have to pull out the no card. Never. Because he would have said, you can't, we don't have any scripts, you're going to write scenes in episode 5, you don't even have an episode 5, you're shooting them in Seattle in a story that you don't even know, you know the broad outlines of the story, and you're going to make it work, and it won the Emmy.
I know.
And as my friend Robin Green says, beat Winds of War. I mean, it was like, it was just this family thing, and it was a great experience. And I think, for John Falsey, I think people always ask, sort of, because we had 5 shows, and one of them Going to Extremes, which is an incredible experience, but of the St. Elsewhere and Northern Exposure and I'll Fly Away, which, and also A Year in the Life, I think, and Falsey isn't here, and we were partners. We both worked on everything together, but he always loved that family stuff. I think he would have been very happy to just spend his career doing a family show, and I got bored. I like St. Elsewhere, and I like Northern. I like different things of doing, and I think that's sort of the basic dichotomy. It doesn't mean that he didn't work on Northern, and didn't work on St. Elsewhere. It just meant that he loved John Updike. He loved, John Cheever. That's what he was. He was very, very happy doing that. And even when we got to I'll Fly Away, the thing that most interested in me, it was like I didn't want to do another family show. I wanted to like, but I said what I did. I talked myself into thinking it's a show that takes place in South Africa today. So it's about race and class, even though it's America in the 1950s, right. and of course, and I'm sure we haven't gone to that, but the genesis of that was just was To Kill a Mockingbird. And there's a scene in To Kill a Mockingbird where Gregory Peck has to go to the courthouse, and it's like 11 o'clock at night or something, and he goes to the woman who takes care of his kids, and he says, listen, would you be able to stay late tonight? I've got to go down to the courthouse. And he goes, absolutely, yes, sir. And I thought, okay, I mean, I know she's staying, but what's her life like? I mean, because it's dropped, and he goes on, and it's the whole thing, and he's the liberal guy, and so that was the part that was interesting to me. But to Falsey, it was much more just the family dynamics were something that he was sort of very, very, that he loved. So we did A Year in the Life, and then it got picked up as a series, and that was a family show. And all of a sudden, the kids came into it. Where in the miniseries they weren't. And Thomas Carter directed all 6 episodes. And
but you directed, I thought, one of.
I directed an episode of the series. That was my first, where I started to direct. I had wanted to. Again, one of the things I learned, it was say yes, and it was sort of like, you're a writer in television. It's a natural progression to be a producer because. And a producer, 60% of what a producer does, or 70 or 80 or 50, is what a director does. And so, and then it was, if you're given the opportunity, say yes. I mean, maybe you'll like doing it, maybe you won't like doing it. And so I did direct my first episode there. And of course, I went to my friends Thomas and to say, well, how do you do this? What do I have to worry about? And I remember Thomas on a yellow sheet of paper, which I still have, wrote down things I should, lenses to use.
You remember anything he told you specifically?
He said, well, remember, this is when the television set was square. He said long lenses, are more flattering in close-ups because the backgrounds fall away. And I don't, he had moving masters, which, like you spend your time sort of orchestrating a master shot, but don't make it just static. Have it turn into different shots. Becomes a 2-shot or an over or a single, and then you sort of fill in the blanks. And so it takes more time to do that at first, but it'll save you time. And it also makes it more interesting for your eye. So there were a bunch of things like that were very helpful to me. And but he did an incredible job on the miniseries, and it was something we were both enormously proud of, and and then the show got canceled. And quite honestly, I mean, I remember Richard Kiley, who was the loveliest guy, and we were shooting the miniseries, and he broke 2 ribs on his bicycle, and he was 64 at the time. I'm 66, and he seemed really old to me then. And he didn't want to be flown to New York to be seen by a doctor. He just basically saw a doctor there and basically got on his bicycle 2 days later and kept riding. And it was like he was just a great guy. And I remember, this is a funny, so the first time I directed an episode, the first shot I had, we had Geraldine Fitzgerald, who had been a movie star and had worked with, some of the greatest directors ever. And this was back in the day when, you had it wasn't digital, and you didn't have Video Village, but so you had a monitor that you could watch and be near the monitor. And I remember Geraldine said to me, she just called me over and she said, please don't watch that, please just look at me. And I said, sure. And then when she had acted, they didn't have monitors, and directors would just basically be there. And she had worked with what's his name? Not Elia Kazan, but William Wyler. And William Wyler was known for doing like 60 takes of a scene to break down an actor. He really wanted to break them down. Of course, you can't do that in television if you wanted to. Not that you'd want to, but if you did, you couldn't. And so anyway, and she was this lovely, beautiful, she was like 80 or something. She was playing Richard Kiley's mother. No, Richard Kiley's girlfriend's mother. Anyway, Richard Kiley is sitting near her bed, and there's a mirror there. And of course, being first directing thing, it's the corniest thing in the world, maybe, I guess. It was the mirror shot. And of course, mirrors change the sides that, you know, the line of how you're shooting. And so I have this shot that's set up that's going to reflect Kiley through the mirror as he's sitting by the side of the bed. I don't remember. Anyway, so I basically have the shot lined up. It's my first shot of anything I've ever directed. And I set it up, and Dick Kiley says, Josh. And I go, he goes, that's my bad side. And I go, okay. I figured first shot, I'm on a crew. The crew's going to, it's like grip wax. They're going to like basically, that's hysterical, Dick, that's great. Anyway, okay, so let's go. And he goes, Josh. I go, he goes, it's my bad side. I go, listen, Dick, that's really hysterical. I get it. I know. You guys, thanks, guys. I'm a schmuck. I get it. Thanks. You've all been terrific. He said, but we really have to go. And he goes, it's my bad side. He had a toupee. And it was the side of his toupee that had the, and I was like, oh. And I'm not a good guy. I'm not a mathematical guy. It was like, I'm thinking, if I put the mirror over there and I get, how does that change the whole thing? I couldn't figure out how to do it. And he looked at me and he saw the look on my face. And he said, it's okay. Just shoot it. You know, it was, and that was the first, he was just a great guy. And he was, and I've been very fortunate that Sam Waterston, John Cullum, these guys are theater guys. They basically are, you know, just John Cullum. You could tell him whatever, you could tell him how you want to say the line. You could do anything you want. The only thing you couldn't do is bring him on the set and not know where you want him to stand. It's the only thing. And Sam also. These are guys who, Sam Waterston won an Academy Award, asked him to play and say, listen, you know, you're playing this guy and the bottom line is he's a weak guy. And Sam goes, that's what I do. It was a movie star and it was like, you know, and that's who they were as people, and that's how they viewed their craft, and how so I was and John were incredibly lucky to work with them. So after A Year in the Life gets canceled, we get a call from Universal. They have a commitment. Do we have any ideas for a show?
You had an overall deal with them, or what kind of a deal do you have with them?
It was an overall deal. Yeah, it was. Yeah, we had an overall deal. So. We come up with what became Northern Exposure, and you know.
Please detail that.
Well, people always say, yeah. I mean, well, I can, you know, what I say is there's a couple of things. One is I was a big fan of the movie Local Hero. I don't know if you've ever seen. I can't remember his name. A Scottish director, and he did Gregory's Girl and. I wish I could remember. I normally remember his name. And the tone of that movie, I just fell in love with it, a character-driven show. And then I had seen a movie called Never Cry Wolf, which Carol Ballard directed, which is, you know, these are, I guess, both fish out of waters. In Local Hero, Peter Riegert plays a guy working for Burt Lancaster, an oilman, and he has to go to this village in Scotland, and he has to buy out the village so they can drill oil on it. And all the Scottish people are these crazy, wacky, odd characters, but not crazy like Broad. Just, there's nothing like it. I mean, just Bill Forsyth, that's the director of them. He made like 3 or 4 movies that were just brilliant. And then he tried to make a transition to sort of an American popular movie and didn't hit. But, and in Never Cry Wolf, Charles Martin Smith plays a guy working in, he's an academic in Boston who is sent to somewhere in Alaska, someplace, to study wolves. And the thing that was so striking about that, other than it's incredibly beautiful to look at, and it's another fish out of water story, and he has to get food and live in a freezing place, but it was the depiction of the Native Americans, and I'll call them Indians because, as I'll tell you a story about that because I directed the Northern Exposure pilot, but they were, I'd never seen them depicted like that, ever, and in anything. They were real. And they were these 2 guys, and they were out, and they wind up killing the wolf to get, they have shitty teeth, and then they have beautiful teeth at the end.
The wolf teeth.
No, they have, you know, bridge work done.
Oh.
They kill the wolf, they sell
Sell
the
it.
pelt, and now they've got great teeth, and they're nice guys. But they were like not, you know, they were just goes to being an outsider. I just had never seen people like that ever depicted on television,
Right.
ever, or in a movie. So those two things were seminal. My friend Lance, again, is now a doctor cop, but he's up in a small town in Schoharie, New York, and I would visit him. And it wasn't Northern Exposure, but he was a guy living in a small town in the middle of nowhere in upstate New York, and had a VFW place that he'd bought and turned into his, you know, medical practice. And he had horses and dogs in the middle of nowhere. And there was another, anyway, those were the things that were, and so came up with this, and I didn't want to do another doctor show. It was like, I was not going to do that. But I knew that if you say a doctor in Alaska, why Alaska? Because, you know, they had talked about, you know, did we want to do it in some other place? Because we knew we couldn't shoot in Alaska. And we said, nah, it's really got to be Alaska. You got to feel like it's Alaska. It's a new frontier. It's where everybody goes to recreate themselves. It's everything that's loose that isn't tied down winds up there. So it would be a fun place to do it. Then, of course, we had to figure out where we could shoot it. And we went to Colorado, and we couldn't. We went to Seattle, and went to towns. We couldn't find a place. And I remember the location manager said, well, I got one more place to show you. And took us to the town of Roslyn, which was 60 miles away from Seattle, over the Schoharie Pass, over the mountains, over the Cascades. And once we saw the town, and in the town, it's one main street, and there was that mural painted on the wall of the camel that said Roslyn. And I remember there, I just turned to him and I said, well, the town was found by, and we knew that we were going to call the place Sicily. We had to, you know, but not like Cicely Tyson. I said, Sicily and Roslyn, they were two lesbos, and they basically found this town, and that's how the town came about.
Oh, that just immediately
It just happened. It was the minute we saw it was Roslyn. We said, well, that's it. That's the whole story of the whole thing. And we said, great, this is going to work. And then, of course, how are we going to do it? But, and this goes back to yes is a better word than no, which I think is probably thematically the point of this whole conversation for me is everybody told me not to do it. My agents told me not to do it. My lawyer told me not to do it. I said, first of all, you're not getting any money to make it. Second of all, nobody's going to see it. Nobody did summer replacement shows. And so it's a waste of your time. It's just don't do this. They're not gonna, and there was no money to do it. Universal made it non-union, because it was non-union, they had to hire another, it didn't say Universal Television, it said we had to hire some guy a non-union guy. We had to go up to Seattle to shoot it. We didn't have money for a real crew. They would say, hey, you know, you want to be a key grip, you're a key grip. And I was directing it, and they didn't want me to direct it, and I think they didn't want me to direct it because they were afraid that I was having too much power in my hands or something. But I said, fuck it, I'm not doing it if I don't direct it. And they wouldn't, you know, say, well, we're only going to pay you for an episode. The minimum, I said, I don't care. I wanted to do it.
Why so badly, were you sure?
Because it was proprietary for me. Yeah, I think of all the shows that I did for me, I mean, I loved St. Elsewhere because I love learning things. I'm a reader, and I loved learning about Munchausen's disease, and I loved, coming up with crazy things. But it was closest to who I am. I mean, I'm interested in ideas. I can read about them. I like to talk about them. I like to think about them, and I'm interested in seeing things that are different. We were going to see something that was going to look different than anything on television. I'm interested in challenges. How are you going to shoot it on a distant location? I have a family now. I have 2 kids. I'm not going to live there. So all of those things appealed to me, and I loved it, and I loved the script, and so I wanted to do it. And I also kind of figured out by that time in my life, I was in, 30-something, that anytime somebody is going to give you money to do something you want to do, say yes. I mean,
even if it's not enough.
Because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know. It's ridiculous, to
Was
say.
it even feasible, the amount of money they gave you for?
No, it was 800. We made the population of the town 829 because they gave us $829,000. I did a Western a few years ago. They gave us $9 million. I mean, so it's not a lot of money to shoot, and literally had a non-union crew, and had non-union producer, and but made the pilot, and And then they did 8 episodes. The
You wrote
fourth,
the pilot. Sorry, you wrote the pilot with.
I wrote the pilot with John, and
Can you talk just for briefly about just the process of how you wrote together? Like, did one person talk, the other wrote? Like, how did you?
well, we basically were in the room together. What we would do, we were different than, for example, the guys who work on the Americans. When you're writing a pilot, you don't know what the show is. I mean, if I'm writing it with you, you don't have a window into your head, and I don't have one in mine, so you can't see what I'm seeing. And so you sit in the room, and we would work it out. And at that point, we had a yellow pad, and one person would hold the yellow pad, and the other person would pace around and talk. Excuse me. And then we would give the yellow pad to our assistant, who would type it up, or on the computer. I don't remember when that came into it. And then as the show went on, we would then split up. Because we're both lazy guys. We both basically, we did not believe in having redundancy where the two of us did the same thing. So he would work on something, and we kind of learned that from The White Shadow, where we were not partners. And we learned it from Amazing Stories when it was an anthology, so he would work on one episode, I would work on the other. So when we did the 6-hour miniseries, we did that together because, first of all, we had those 3 weeks, and we had to do it together. And we liked being with each other, and we would yell at each other and scream, and then we'd walk out, so, what do you want to have lunch? And everybody would look like, but we were very good friends, and we enjoyed each other's company enormously. And we'd go to the batting cage and stuff like that. He was a sporty guy, too. And so we would write it together, and then we would, and he was very supportive of my directing, and he never wanted to direct. That was not a goal, or had zero interest in doing it. And it's interesting, though, because we were friends. We were at Universal a lot with these guys, Levinson and Link. I don't know if you've heard of them. But who was Bill and who was...
William Link?
Yeah, and Bill Levinson. Anyway, they were great guys. And they created Columbo. They made some of the greatest TV movies ever made. They're like independent movies now. They did That Certain Summer with Martin Sheen, which is about a gay guy. They did one about, the only American soldier ever executed after World War II. I mean, they did really great stuff. And they were brilliant guys and funny guys and great guys. And they'd known each other since they were in high school. And I said, well, how have you guys always stayed together? He said, neither one of us ever wanted to direct. So, but I did. I would get bored, and I would go, and I'd say, I don't know if I'm going to like this or I'm not going to like it, but I want to do it. Why not? And so I did it. I directed the pilot. And then so they did 8 episodes, and then all of a sudden it was popular. Somehow people had found this summer show that didn't have any money. And I remember the 4th episode we did in the first 8 was a crazy one where we introduced Adam Arkin, and he was some weirdo, chef, crazy guy out in the middle of the woods. There was a legend about him. And I remember we loved that episode, and it was in our head, and certainly in my head, it was like, we could do anything we want to do on this show. Yeah. And the network was terrified, and they said, well, okay, but can we air it number 8? It was supposed to be number 4. And we said, air it any number you want to air it, but you're going to air it. So we'll air it number 8. And then everybody loved it. And it was kind of like going back to St. Elsewhere when you had doctors talking, you don't understand what they're saying. Doesn't matter. If they get the way a dog gets what you're saying when knows how you feel about them by your tone, human beings are the same way. We're no different. We pick up what we need to pick up to believe it, to be invested in it, to believe it. And so then they ordered another 8.
Did that surprise you, though, that people were getting what you were writing, that you were finding that audience? Did it surprise you, given, the terms people were saying, quirky, that term?
Well, it surprised me. Well, in St. Elsewhere, it was a great learning experience. Well, I'll can I take a brief detour?
Oh, of course.
Along this time, this was St. Elsewhere, Northern Exposure is going, and it's become a big hit. It was a critical hit. It's the only show that I did that was a critical hit. It was a top 20 show, and sometimes a top 10 show. And it was it was a commercial hit, is what I'm saying, and it was also a critical hit. The critics loved it. I mean, it was like everybody loved it, and so that gave us tremendous kind of juice in the business. And we were represented by CAA, and CAA decided, Mike Ovitz decided, he didn't tell me he decided this, but in some way he decided that he was going to put advertising agencies out of business. That if you were Coca-Cola and you wanted to make Coca-Cola commercials, you don't need an advertising agency. Come to me and I'm going to give you, you know, my, I don't know, big directors. I'm going to give you Rob Reiner, and I'm going to give you a couple of guys. I'm going to give you Josh Brand and John Falsey. So they came to us and said, do you want to do a Coca-Cola commercial? And Falsey, God bless him, said, yeah. And I said, I keep saying God bless him. I'm not a religious whatever, but, you know, heaven help us. So we were hired to do a Coca-Cola commercial that we were going to write and create and that I was going to direct. And because it was this big deal that Mike Ovitz was going to put, you know, all the advertising agencies were going to become irrelevant and expendable. Why do you need the middleman to basically do it? You have a product, Microsoft, just go to CAA and we're going to give you the most creative guys in Hollywood and they're going to do it. Mm. So we come up with this story that doesn't have any words and we storyboard the whole thing and we go to Italy. And they've got to pay me, I forgot what it's called, my lawyer said, they've got to pay me what they pay everyone. So I got to get, they had to pay me what they paid Rob Reiner. They had to pay me whatever they paid the top directors in Hollywood to do these things. They had to pay me. It was the best job I ever had. 2 weeks in Tuscany, doing a 30-second and 60-second commercial. The DP was Jean de Bont, who had afterwards became a very successful director, and he was a big DP who did big movies. And I had a German crew following me around to do a German documentary of the making of this commercial. And I had these two actors. One was a Spanish dancer, one was an Italian guy, and they didn't speak any English. So there I am going, a destra, sinistra. I'm having a ball. Anyway, we make this thing, and I go back in the editing room. And the editor, and I must have seen the commercial 1,000 times. The only thing Coca-Cola cared about was the guy, when he drinks the Coca-Cola, his Adam's apple, is it moving the way they wanted it? So when we got to that shot, I was like, okay, guys, because all of a sudden, then all of the people from Coca-Cola and everybody would like go right to the monitor. I mean, they didn't care about the rest of the stuff. You know, have a ball, guys, make a night of it. You know, is that one good? The guy would be throwing up from drinking all this Coca-Cola. And so we got back, and the editor and he must have looked at it 1,000 times, and I must have looked at it 1,000 times, and Coca-Cola must have looked at it 1,000 times. And one day, and they showed it on the Academy Awards, you know, it was on television, they showed it in movie theaters, and one day, I'm watching it again, I don't remember why, probably because, why not, and I'm looking at it, and I freeze it, and I go, what? Okay, here's the shot. It's a voyeurism. There's this handsome glass blower, an Italian guy who's blowing up a thing in his shop in Italy, and what he's going to blow up is a Coca-Cola bottle. Mm-hmm. And there's this beautiful girl riding a bicycle, and she sees him, and she looks through the window, and she watches him. What he does at the end, he's got this big long tube, and he basically and at the end is a Coca-Cola bottle, and what he does is he breaks off the Coca-Cola bottle, and there he holds it up. Puts it down or something. And I look at it and I go, shit. The thing that he's blowing it from is about 7 feet long, and he's breaking it off, and his other hand is there. What's holding up the big long thing? The point is, he couldn't have done what he did on camera, and no one ever saw it.
Yeah.
And I learned something. And it goes back to the thing you were asking or saying about learning about when Fiscus, Howie Mandel, gave this long speech about how he killed somebody in a way that you get he did something bad, but you don't know what he did. It's the basis of all magic tricks, which is what making television movies is. It's the most unrealistic, most fake process of anything, and yet when you watch it, it's the only one that looks really real. It's not like a play where the guy goes to the window and goes, "I see the ships coming in," on, you know, he's looking out a window on a stage. And so I learned the same way that there's a figure and there's a ground, and the eye can only look at one thing. So if you're watching the thing, or if you're listening to the thing, you're not seeing. If I'm doing a magic trick, I've got to know what you're looking at so I can do the thing that I want to do that you're not looking at. And so that's what I kind of learned, and it's related to, you know, to what actor to when you're writing something that's, you can't understand what people are saying in a spy thing, but you know they're spies, or you're. It was this, and I learned something, and I said, it's physiological. It's not, you know, the way we absorb things. It's like when I was saying it's a dog. You pick something up without, you know, the network executives would say, "Oh, we don't understand what he's talking about." It goes, it doesn't matter. You don't want to do the whole script like that, obviously, but a little bit of that tells the audience that these people are good at what they do. And that's all the audience cares about. They don't care if they're nice people. Tony Soprano's not nice. They care that they're good at what they do. Because if you're not good at what they do, then they're not really interested in you. So we did Northern Exposure. I mean, I did 66 episodes of that, but it lasted 5 years because they did 8. It was like a cable show. They did 8, and then they did 8, and I got to do anything I wanted to do. I literally, at some point where I was going to get fired from that too, and I basically agreed. They flew me. I agreed to, because I did something where I broke the fourth wall, and they didn't want me to do it. And it was an episode where the Russian guy, they had a duel, and the characters go, "Well, he can't obviously kill him. I mean, you know, it's like," and then they just walk off. So it was a version of breaking the fourth wall, and they didn't want me to air that. They said they would lose the audience. And I said, I don't care. You know, I just want to. It's great. It's funny. It's terrific. And they aired it. But at the end of that year, they flew me to New York, and Jeff Sagansky, the guy who had come to see my play, who gave me an episode of the Jimmy Breslin show, was the head of the network. And he always wanted it to be, he thought it was a doctor show. He thought we were going to call it Dr. Snow. He said, "Where are the medical stories? Where are the medical stories? There's no medical stories in this show." And I couldn't tell him, but I was going to be, I'm not doing a medical show. I will throw up. And of course, once it became successful, he didn't care. He said, "Don't do medical stories." But they basically wanted me to say, "Are you going to be a good boy? I mean, are you going to basically," and I said, "I'll be a good boy." I kissed the ring. And I went back to LA and I thought about it, and I went to Falsey and I said, "I can't do this. I'm not doing this. I'm sorry." And I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't being a wise guy. I didn't want to do it. I just didn't want to do it. It was like, I loved it. I loved what I was doing. And so I called my agent. He said, "Fine." And he wasn't as comfortable with the show. It wasn't his wheelhouse. But he was a good friend. And he just said, "So fuck it, we're out of there." I called my agent. He said, "Are you serious? Do you want more money?" And I said, "No, I don't want more money. I just don't want to do it." And basically, the studio called me up a day later and said, "Okay, you can do whatever you want to do as long as you're not asking us for more money." Wow. I said, "You got a deal." And then they let me do whatever I wanted to do. And then I left after 5 years. And the reason I left, it was quite simply, I felt like I was repeating myself, and not to be precious about it, I just didn't want to do that. I kind of loved it. And I said, I've gotten to do everything I want. I read an article once about some guy I don't know if he was in Europe or Canada, who built a trebuchet, who built a
catapult?
Yeah. He built catapults, and he used to, and I said, "Let's do that in the show."
Great episode.
And I brought him in, and he built a catapult, and I said, "I just want to see you fling something in this catapult." And we flung a piano, and we made a tape of it where we practiced it. And it's the most amazing thing. We saw the G-forces on the piano as the piano breaks up in midair. So I saw, I can't remember the mime, Bill, a wonderful mime, and I just said, "Let's just put him in the show." And he came up, and we did a love story with him in Maryland, I said, I don't really want to do this anymore, because I don't know. I mean, maybe if I could take a year off or something and recharge my batteries. And Falsey didn't want to do it, because I said, "Well, I'll do 13 if you'll do half of them." And he said, "No." He said it was not his thing. And so that was that. But while we were doing it, we also sold I'll Fly Away, and we sold Going to Extremes. And Les Moonves, who's the head of CBS, and he was the head of Warner Brothers, and we then had a deal at Warner Brothers and at CBS.
And at ABC, right?
And at ABC. So we went to NBC and we pitched them I'll Fly Away and Going to Extremes.
I want to take a quick break. If
Yeah,
we can.
sure.
Is that okay? Because I